My family chose not to invite me to the reunion, so I decided to show up unannounced, share my engagement news, and finally stand up for myself. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings and currently 28 years old. As a child, it was always evident that I didn't quite fit in. My parents clearly had favorites. Or rather, multiple favorites, with their stable careers, large homes, and picture-perfect marriages. My siblings embodied everything parents could brag about. My brother, a 35-year-old man, and my sister, a 32-year-old woman, are the ideal children. My sister works as some kind of lawyer, and my brother has a career in finance. Both live in charming suburban neighborhoods, with spouses who complement their professional lives. Every family gathering turns into an occasion for my parents to gush about them to friends and relatives. And then there's me. 2 years ago, I left my corporate job to start a small business that I'm genuinely proud of. I'm happy with my life, earning enough to live comfortably. My boyfriend of 5 years and I rent a home together. And though we aren't rolling in money, we're doing fine. My parents, however, see things differently. They often throw around words like stable and traditional, and I don't think I meet those expectations. Over time, their subtle digs about my so-called hobby job and comments about how I should have stuck with a 9-to-5 lifestyle have lost their sting. On the surface, we've always been civil, but the underlying tension has been there for years. Still, I didn't think things were this bad. A few weeks ago, I stumbled across my cousin's story on Instagram while scrolling. She seemed to be at a big family reunion, the kind my family usually hosts a few times a year. Everyone was there. My brother, my sister, their partners, and our extended family. All smiling for photos in one house. Except for me, my aunt, uncle, and cousins were all tagged in the post. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed the group chat. Perhaps the invite got buried in my notifications. I sent a text to my siblings. My brother usually replies quickly, and while my sister can be slower to respond, she doesn't completely ignore me. But this time, nothing. Hours passed, and I began to feel that unsettling tightness in my chest, the kind that comes when you know something is wrong, but don't want to fully admit it yet. The next day, I called my mother. I kept the conversation casual, asking how she was and if there had been a get-together recently. The silence on the other end of the line stretched far too long. Finally, she said, "Oh, the reunion? I didn't think you'd want to come. You're always so busy with your little business and everything." I paused before responding. I asked her why she thought I wouldn't want to attend, reminding her that family is still family. Her voice grew lighter as she tried to dismiss the topic. "We just didn't want to bother you, sweetheart. Besides, you've missed a few events before." That was true, but only because of work, and I always let them know in advance. As I pressed further, it became clear my absence wasn't an oversight. They hadn't forgotten about me. They'd chosen not to include me. Hearing it directly made my stomach drop, and I couldn't quite explain why. After hanging up, I replayed the exchange in my head. I'd felt excluded before. Holiday plans often revolved around my siblings' families. I used to tell myself it wasn't deliberate. Maybe they didn't think to include me because I didn't have kids or a traditional lifestyle. But now, sitting in my quiet kitchen and watching my boyfriend work in the next room, I couldn't ignore the truth. This was intentional. When I told my partner, he was outraged. "You should go anyway," he said firmly. "They don't get to decide you don't belong there." He was right. Why should I let them pretend I didn't exist? I was done being treated like an afterthought. I had every right to be part of my family, whether they liked it or not. That's when the plan began to take shape. For weeks, I'd been holding on to one piece of news that I hadn't shared yet. 2 weeks earlier, my boyfriend and I had gotten engaged. I wanted to tell my family in person, thinking they'd care about such a milestone in my life. But now, I had another reason to reveal it. I'd remind them I existed. If they were determined to exclude me this time, they wouldn't succeed. I decided to show up unannounced. My boyfriend, bless him, offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to handle alone. We came up with a backup plan. He'd drive up and pick me up if things didn't go well. If they didn't want me there, I'd leave, but not before saying what I needed to say. To make it seem like I'd always planned to come, I spent the days beforehand preparing a large batch of snacks to bring. For me, this wasn't about proving myself. Even though my partner insisted I had nothing to prove, I knew I needed to show up for myself. I was tired of being pushed aside, treated like I didn't belong. I promised myself that if I had to leave, I'd do so with a smile. After sharing my news, I couldn't control how they felt about me, but I could control how I responded. For once, I refused to let them make me feel like an outsider. The next day, I called my mother. Keeping my tone casual, I asked how she was and if there had been a get-together recently. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long before she finally said, "Oh, the reunion? I didn't think you'd want to come. You're always so busy with your little business and everything." I took a moment before replying. I asked why she assumed I wouldn't want to attend, pointing out that family is still family. Her voice turned lighter, trying to brush off the topic. "We just didn't want to bother you, sweetheart. Besides, you've missed a few events before." While true, those absences had been due to work, and I'd always let them know in advance. The more I pressed, the more obvious it became. My absence wasn't accidental. They hadn't forgotten me. They had intentionally left me out. Hearing it confirmed made my stomach sink, though I wasn't sure why. After hanging up, I replayed the conversation in my head. I'd felt excluded before. Holiday plans often revolved around my siblings' families. I used to tell myself it wasn't deliberate, that they simply didn't consider me because I lacked kids or a conventional lifestyle. But now, as I sat in my quiet kitchen, watching my boyfriend work in the next room, I couldn't deny the truth. This was intentional. When I told my partner, he was furious. "You should go anyway," he said firmly. "They don't get to decide you don't belong." He was right. Why should I let them pretend I didn't exist? I was done being an afterthought. I deserved a place in my family, whether they liked it or not. That's when my plan took shape. For weeks, I'd been sitting on one piece of news. 2 weeks earlier, my boyfriend and I had gotten engaged. I'd wanted to share it in person, believing it was something my family would care about. But now, I had another reason to reveal it. To remind them I existed. If they were determined to exclude me, this time, they wouldn't succeed. I decided to show up uninvited. My boyfriend, bless him, offered to come along, but I declined. This was something I needed to face on my own. We made a backup plan. He'd come pick me up if things went badly. If they didn't want me there, I'd leave, but not before saying my piece. To make it look like I'd always planned to come, I spent the days leading up to it baking a large batch of cookies. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. My partner had insisted I didn't need to, but I knew I needed to show up for myself. I was tired of being treated like I didn't belong. I promised myself that if I had to leave, I'd do so with a smile after sharing my news. I couldn't control how they felt about me, but I could control how I reacted. For once, I wouldn't let them make me feel like an outsider. Additionally, I figured that if things didn't go well, at least I'd have closure. First update. The drive to my parents' house took a little over 3 hours. Most of that time was spent mentally rehearsing how to act nonchalant, as if I'd just casually stopped by. It felt ironic, given why I was really going. The box of cookies on the passenger seat smelled sweet and comforting. My partner had checked in twice, assuring me he'd be ready to come get me if needed. I promised to keep him updated. When I arrived, the house was packed. Cars were parked on the lawn and lined the driveway. I took a deep breath, grabbed the cookie box, and headed to the door. Laughter, music, and clinking dishes spilled out from inside. As I stepped through the slightly open door, the noise abruptly stopped. I didn't need to look up to know that every pair of eyes in the room had turned toward me. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. My mother was the first to recover. She hurried over, her voice high and overly cheerful. "Oh, you made it. How unexpected." She patted my arm but didn't hug me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and the warmth in her tone felt fake. The room shuffled uncomfortably. People resumed their conversations, but the atmosphere had shifted. Before my brother disappeared into the kitchen, I caught him exchanging a look with my sister across the room. She glanced at me briefly, then turned back to a lively conversation with some aunts. From across the room, I saw the cousin whose Instagram story had tipped me off. She gave me a small, apologetic smile and nodded. I placed my cookies on the dining table, beside what looked like a catered spread, but no one acknowledged them. It stung when I overheard an aunt whisper to someone in the hallway. Did they not invite her on purpose? Moving away from the dining room, I slipped into the living room, pretending to check my phone. A few minutes later, my cousin approached me. Lowering her voice and glancing over her shoulder, she said, "They didn't think you'd come. Your parents, they didn't think you'd fit in anymore." Her regret was clear, but her words cut deep. Fit in. As if I were an out-of-place puzzle piece in a family portrait. I spotted my dad by the drink station and decided to approach him. I asked why I hadn't been told about the reunion. Without looking up, he said, "We thought you'd be happier doing your own thing." His words hung heavily in the air. They weren't harsh, but they stung. Realizing I wouldn't get any real answers, I didn't press further. I didn't feel like chatting with relatives who barely acknowledged me. The box of cookies I'd brought remained untouched on the table. But not everything was awful. A few younger cousins came over to greet me. They asked about my business and mentioned seeing some of my work online. It felt good to know someone cared. As the room buzzed with conversation, I sat in a corner, scrolling my phone, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to cause a scene. That's when my sister's voice rang out. Beaming with excitement, she clapped her hands and announced, "Everyone, I have some news to share." The room fell silent as she revealed she was expecting her second child. Cheers erupted, and a few uncles joked about betting on whether it'd be a boy or a girl. My mother looked like she might burst with pride. No one so much as glanced my way. The laughter and congratulations swirled around me, and I felt invisible again. It was the same old story. My presence didn't matter. The fact that I'd shown up, uninvited, was irrelevant. My family would always celebrate my siblings and treat me like an outsider. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was my dad's dismissal, the whispers I'd overheard, or the sight of my untouched cookies. Perhaps it was all of it. I grabbed a glass from the drink table and tapped it loudly with a fork. Conversations trailed off as heads turned my way. My sister, still soaking up attention, looked annoyed. I ignored her. "Well," I began steadily, "I have something to share too. Since we're announcing big news." Second update. Once again, the room went silent. All eyes turned to me, though the attention felt less welcoming than it had been for my sister. My heart raced, but I held firm. "I just wanted to share some news of my own," I said, raising my left hand. The engagement ring sparkled in the dining room light. "I got engaged 2 weeks ago." For a moment, no one reacted. Then, scattered claps broke out from a corner of the room. My little cousins, bless their hearts, cheered for me. The rest of the room stayed frozen, as if they were still processing the news. A polite uncle gave a faint nod of acknowledgement, forcing a thin smile. The kind you'd reserve for a stranger. My mother's face fell instantly. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" she asked, her tone sounding more like an accusation than genuine curiosity or excitement. Her eyes flickered briefly to the ring before locking back on me. I didn't hesitate. Loud enough for everyone to hear, I replied, "I wasn't sure you'd care." My voice was steady but sharp. "After all, I wasn't invited here, was I? I assumed you didn't want me involved in family matters anymore." The room grew heavy with discomfort. People shifted in their seats, exchanged uneasy glances, or busied themselves with their phones. My brother, who had been leaning against the kitchen doorway, suddenly straightened and strode forward. His face was flushed, his voice cutting. "This isn't about you. You always have to make everything about yourself." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, faint whispers of "not now" drifting through the crowd. But all eyes were on him, and the tension radiated from his crossed arms. It was stifling, yet I didn't back down. "Really?" I shot back. "You all seem just fine without me. Funny though. I don't remember getting an invitation to this little celebration. And for the record, my engagement is just as important as anyone else's news." Silence blanketed the room again. My sister, still glowing from her announcement, refused to meet my eyes. Her earlier confidence had given way to a faint blush. My mother's carefully maintained polite expression faltered, morphing into something colder, more familiar. She took a deep breath, likely preparing to say something. But before she could, another voice cut through the stillness. "She has every right to be upset," said one of my cousins. Her arms folded as she perched on the edge of the couch. "What did you expect? That she'd just stay quiet forever?" Heads turned toward her, and from the dining table, another relative added, "She's not wrong, you know." For a brief moment, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the cracks in their unity visible. My mother, clearly sensing she was losing control of the situation, did what she always did when cornered. She redirected. "Well," she said, her tone unnaturally cheerful, "let's not forget the exciting news that your sister is having another baby." Her voice brimmed with forced enthusiasm. The whole family is just thrilled about it. It was a blatant deflection, and the room obediently followed her lead. Attention swung back to my sister, who beamed and thanked everyone again for their congratulations. My brother smirked at me, a smug expression that seemed to say, "See, I was done." Pulling out my phone, I texted my fiancé, "Come get me." Without another word, I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. I wasn't staying a second longer than necessary. 2 younger cousins hurried after me, their voices tinged with guilt as they asked where I was going. One hugged me tightly and whispered, "You don't deserve this." I hugged her back and forced a small smile. "I'll be fine," I assured her. From the other side of the room, I heard my dad mutter, "Drama queen," just loud enough for me to catch. I froze briefly as I put on my coat, but I didn't look back. Instead, I opened the door and stepped outside. The cool air hit me like a shock, clearing some of the heaviness in my chest. I was halfway down the driveway when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Wait!" someone called. I stopped and turned. One of my cousins jogged to catch up, her shoes crunching against the gravel. She looked embarrassed, almost lost for words. I'm sorry," she finally said, "for everything. It was brave of you to speak up in there. You didn't deserve to be treated like that." A lump rose in my throat, but I managed to nod. "Thank you," I said softly. Her phone buzzed and she glanced back toward the house, clearly being summoned. With a final apologetic look, she hurried away. Moments later, my fiancé's car pulled into the driveway. I climbed in, buckled my seatbelt, and tossed my bag onto the seat. As soon as we started moving, the tears came, fast and unrelenting, like they'd been building for hours. He didn't say a word. He simply reached over and held my hand as the trees outside blurred into streaks of green and gray. By the time we hit the main road, my sobs had softened into quiet sniffles. My chest still felt raw, but underneath the shame and sadness was a small sense of relief. For once, I hadn't just let them walk all over me. I'd stood up for myself. Third update. The only sound in the car at first was the hum of the tires against the pavement. My fiancé drove in silence while I stared out the window, replaying every agonizing moment of the reunion in my mind. Eventually, I started talking. I told him about my brother's mocking tone, my dad's drama queen comment, and my mom's refusal to give me even a moment of recognition. I explained how my sister's pregnancy announcement had felt like the final straw. The words poured out, unfiltered. He listened, one hand resting on the gear shift, nodding occasionally. When I finally stopped, he glanced over and said firmly, "You did the right thing. They don't get to treat you like you don't matter. We'll move forward without needing their approval." His reassurance helped, but I stayed quiet. As we neared home, my phone buzzed in my lap. I glanced down at my phone. The cousin who had followed me out of the gathering had left a message. "You were right. For a long time, your parents have been talking about you behind your back." I sat up straighter, my breath catching in my throat. There was more to the message. "I'm sorry, but you need to know this. Your mom told everyone that your lack of a career makes you a disappointment. She also said your sister's announcement is far more important than your engagement." I read the words twice, struggling to process them. Before I could respond, another message came through. This time with screenshots. It was from a family group chat I'd clearly been excluded from. My mother's name was prominently visible in one of the screenshots. I don't see why she'd even want to come. She always makes everything about herself. She gave up a real career to play pretend as a business owner. So selfish. At least sister is living a life we can actually be proud of. My chest tightened. The next screenshot was even worse. Honestly, I didn't tell her about the reunion because I didn't want her showing up and stealing the spotlight with some dramatic story about her engagement. Who cares anyway? She's not even getting married first. The bile rose in my throat as I stared at the messages. The TV flickered back on, and I felt my fiancé's gaze on me. "What is it?" he asked gently. "Proof," I muttered, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. When we got home, I was still clutching my phone, seething with disbelief. I re-added myself to the family group chat. A chat I'd been kicked out of years ago and only occasionally added back to for major announcements. My fingers trembled as I uploaded the screenshots, sending them without a caption. Then I typed, "Is this really how you all feel about me?" The responses were almost immediate. My brother's message came first. "This was private. You're blowing things out of proportion and being dramatic, as usual." My sister followed. "What did you expect? Sharing this for no reason just makes everything worse. Give it a rest." The texts kept coming, rapid and accusatory, before my mother finally chimed in. Her message was longer than the others. Those comments were taken out of context. "You're reading too much into things and creating unnecessary drama. You've always been overly sensitive." My grip tightened on my phone as I typed my response. "I'm upset because no parent should speak about their child like this. And you didn't even invite me to my own family's reunion. This is how you really see me." For the first time, my dad's name appeared in the chat. But instead of saying anything, he left a single scene tag beneath my message. That was all. I didn't wait to see what else might follow. I threw my phone onto the couch and switched it to silent. Beside me, my fiancé pulled me into a comforting embrace, his steady presence grounding me. Moments later, my phone buzzed again. Hesitantly, I picked it up. It was a private message from one of my aunts. "I had no idea any of this was happening. I'm so sorry for the way you've been treated. You deserve so much better." Another message arrived shortly after. "We're proud of you for standing up for yourself. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." It wasn't much, but it felt like a lifeline. For so long, I doubted myself, wondering if I was exaggerating, just as my mother always claimed. But now I had proof, and at least a handful of people in my corner. As I was starting to believe the worst had passed, my phone rang. My sister's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, debating whether to answer, but finally, I picked up. "You're ruining the family dynamic," she snapped before I could say a word. "Why couldn't you just let it go? Mom didn't invite you because she didn't want any conflict. And now look what you've done. You've made everything worse." I didn't yell or argue. I kept my voice steady as I replied, "You don't just let go of not being invited to your own family's reunion." She hung up without another word. That night, as I sat beside my fiancé, I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep fighting for the approval of people who didn't want me in their lives. For my own mental health, I had to let go. I left the family group chat, blocked my sister's number, and allowed myself to give up. For the first time in years, if love wasn't freely given, I wouldn't beg for it. Update 4. A week after the fallout from the family group chat, my phone rang out of the blue. I froze when I saw the name on the screen. It was my dad. For context, my dad rarely called me. In fact, he almost never got involved in family drama, leaving most of it to my mom. Seeing his name appear now was a complete shock. I considered letting the call go to voicemail, but my curiosity won out. Hesitantly, I answered. At first, my dad stuck to the usual awkward small talk, but after a long silence, he finally got to the point. He said he wanted to address the reunion. His tone was stiff, almost rehearsed. He claimed it wasn't meant to hurt me, and referred to the situation as a miscommunication. Hearing anything remotely apologetic from him was rare, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook. I asked why I hadn't been invited in the first place. After fumbling for words, he eventually said it wasn't intentional. I told him that explanation didn't add up. How does someone accidentally forget to invite their own child? I pressed further, reminding him that my mother's remarks in the group chat painted a very different picture. He didn't reply right away. The silence stretched uncomfortably until he finally spoke, his voice softer now. "She thought it would be for the best," he admitted. "Your mother didn't want any conflict." Then I heard it, a faint rustling in the background, followed by my mother's voice. She must have been listening on speakerphone because she suddenly cut in. "I'm here too," she said abruptly, as if I had called her. Her tone quickly shifted to emotional as she launched into accusations. She claimed I was attacking her and embarrassing the family by sharing the screenshots. Her voice wavered as she insisted that I was the real problem. She said I had made everything public just to humiliate her. I stayed calm, refusing to argue or yell. "I'm not attacking you," I said evenly. "I'm only asking for the truth." My fiancé, who had been sitting nearby, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't let them twist this." His support grounded me. My mother's tone changed when she realized I wouldn't back down. After a dramatic sniff, she said, "You only announced your engagement to steal your sister's spotlight." I almost laughed. Instead, I calmly told her that I, like my sister, had every right to share my good news. There was no competition. None of this would have happened, I pointed out, if they'd simply invited me in the first place. Her silence spoke volumes, but when she finally replied, she played the victim, as always. "Well, maybe it's better if you don't come to family gatherings at all. If you can't forgive and move on," she said forcefully. There it was, the final command. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "If that's how you feel, fine," I said, and hung up. I stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it down. My fiancé sat beside me, waiting patiently. I told him everything. My mom's accusations, her ultimatum, and my dad's half-hearted apology. "They're showing you who they really are," he said with a nod. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the phone call in my head. More than that, I reflected on everything that had led up to this moment. The holidays I spent alone while my siblings prioritized their families, the endless comparisons between my unstable career and my siblings' achievements, the dismissive comments, and the subtle but constant reminders that I was always second place. It hit me. I didn't deserve this. I wasn't going to keep fighting for scraps of affection or pretending. Everything was fine. My family had made it clear time and again where I stood. For the first time, I decided to stop chasing people who made me feel small. The next morning, my fiancé handed me a cup of coffee and sat across from me. His expression was serious. "I've been thinking," he said. "What if we hosted our own engagement party? Something small, just with the people who actually support us." At first, the idea felt strange. Celebrating without my family seemed unthinkable. They had always been my default. But the more I considered it, the more it made sense. Why should I keep pouring my energy into people who didn't care? The people who loved us for who we were, not who they wanted us to be, were the ones who deserved to share this milestone with us. We made a list of guests, a few close friends, my fiancé's family, and a handful of cousins who had privately reached out to support me. They all agreed I deserved better. I decided to focus on those who showed up for me unconditionally and let go of the rest. I kept the party a secret from my parents and siblings. There was no point in trying to repair something so broken. It would only lead to more pain. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to beg for their acceptance. Fifth update. The engagement party gave me everything I hadn't realized I needed. It was modest and private, attended only by my fiancé's family, a few loyal relatives and close friends. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. For once, I was surrounded by people who truly cared about me. We decorated our backyard with string lights, served a mix of takeout and homemade dishes, and set up tables adorned with flowers my fiancé had bought at a local market. The setup was simple, but perfect. Early in the evening, guests started to arrive. I hadn't felt such genuine joy at a gathering in years. The atmosphere was light, filled with laughter. One of the first to arrive was the cousin who had sent me the screenshots. She gave me a warm hug. "You deserve better," she said softly. I appreciated that she didn't bring up the reunion. "We're proud of you." About an hour later, a surprise guest arrived. Another car pulled up and my fiancé nudged me with a smile. One of my aunts, who had been leaving, stopped to let someone else step out. This wasn't just any aunt. She had been the only one to privately message me after the group chat. Controversy to apologize, saying she hadn't realized what was happening. I hadn't expected her, but there she was, smiling warmly, holding a modestly wrapped gift. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said. Her presence rendered me momentarily speechless. She hugged me and added, "I wanted to see you both and congratulate you in person." It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. Having her there, along with everyone else who came without hesitation, was invaluable. Later in the evening, my fiancé raised his glass to make a toast. The crowd quieted, their attention fully on him. "To my future wife," he began, smiling. "I've watched her face so many challenges and come out stronger every time. I'm proud of her, of us, and of the life we're building together." Applause followed, with someone shouting, "To the happy couple." Looking around at all the faces, I felt truly seen for the first time. There were no hidden jabs, no judgments, no expectations to meet. Just love and support. As the night wore on, we lingered by the fire pit with a few close friends, laughing and talking until late. At one point, a relative remarked with a grin, "I haven't seen you this happy in years." 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected email from my dad. When I saw his name in my inbox, I hesitated before opening it. The message began with an apology, and this time it felt sincere. He admitted he hadn't defended me at the reunion, or in many instances before it. He expressed guilt for not doing more to make me feel included. "I know I haven't spoken up when you needed me," he wrote. "I hope we can start to rebuild, even if it takes time." I read the email twice, pausing at the final note. "Your mom still doesn't see things the same way. She feels like the real victim in all of this, and I'm not sure she'll ever own up to her part. I'm sorry for that too." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. My mother had never been one to take responsibility. I took some time to think before replying. My response was brief. I thanked my dad for reaching out and told him I appreciated his effort. But actions mattered more than words. If he genuinely wanted to rebuild, it would take work from both sides. I didn't expect a reply and wasn't waiting for one. I wasn't hoping for my dad to suddenly transform into the ideal parent. His small step was enough for now, but I wouldn't settle for half measures. A few days later, my sister couldn't resist stirring the pot. I came across one of her passive-aggressive Facebook posts. "It's funny how some people love airing personal details for attention," she wrote. "Good or bad, family is family." I didn't react. I didn't even allow myself the time to get upset. I blocked her and moved on. Her opinions, sarcasm, and judgment no longer held any power over me. In the weeks that followed, my life became quieter but fuller. I focused on growing my business, planning our wedding, and spending time with people who genuinely cared about me. For the first time, I felt at peace. Letting go of the need to win my family's approval was liberating. Looking back, I realized how much time I had wasted trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. My family's inability to see my worth was a reflection of them, not of me. Family is everything, some people say, and maybe it is, for them. But family should mean love, respect, and support, not judgment or exclusion. Now, I'm building a life with people who accept me for who I am. I've never been happier. I don't know what the future holds for my parents or siblings, but I do know this. I'll never settle for less than I deserve again. And honestly, it feels amazing. Thanks for watching. Subscribe Storycast for more new stories.